September 11th, 2001. A Tuesday morning like any other. Imagine this: you wake up, kiss your child goodbye at the school bus stop, grab a coffee on your way to work, or catch an early flight to make a business meeting. For thousands, it was a routine morning, a day so ordinary it felt forgettable. But by 8:46 a.m., the world would remember this day forever. Out of the clear blue sky, a jetliner roared toward New York City and slammed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Flames exploded against the steel, smoke poured into the morning air, and the city froze. People thought it was a freak accident, until 17 minutes later, when a second plane ripped through the South Tower. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a coincidence. This was murder. And the world had just entered the darkest morning of its modern history. But what unfolded over the next 2 hours wasn't just tragedy, it was terror, courage, heartbreak, and the birth of a mystery that would haunt generations. It began quietly, the way all tragedies do. 8 a.m., commuters rushed through subway stations, cabs honked in traffic, and the Twin Towers gleamed against a perfect blue sky. No one knew that inside airports in Boston, Newark, and Washington, 19 men had boarded 4 separate planes. Each carried nothing more suspicious than small box cutters, their true weapon being something far more terrifying: time and secrecy. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 smashed into the North Tower. The explosion was deafening. Fire and debris rained down hundreds of feet. Office workers on lower floors looked up in confusion, while those above the crash line were instantly trapped. For many, the exits were gone. Smoke filled the hallways. The building shook, but it stood tall, for now. 17 minutes later, the unthinkable repeated. At 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 tore into the South Tower, slicing it open like paper. The impact was broadcast live, seen by millions. People screamed at their televisions. Anchors choked on their words. The world realized in real time, this was an attack. But the horror wasn't over. At 9:37 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 slammed into the Pentagon, ripping through the heart of America's military command. The symbol of U.S. defense was burning. And at 10:03 a.m., United Flight 93 went down in a Pennsylvania field. The passengers had fought back. They stormed the cockpit, their final words, "Let's roll," forever etched in history. Their sacrifice saved countless lives, stopping the plane from reaching its intended target, Washington, D.C. In less than 2 hours, 4 hijacked planes had rewritten history. Nearly 3,000 innocent lives would be lost before the day was done. Picture the chaos. Firefighters rushed into burning towers, climbing stairwells as terrified office workers fled downward. Strangers held hands as they escaped through dark, smoke-filled corridors. Some jumped from windows hundreds of feet above the ground, choosing to fall rather than burn. Families watching from home screamed at their TV screens, powerless. And then, the moment the world gasped. At 9:59 a.m., the South Tower collapsed. 100 floors pancaked in less than 12 seconds, unleashing a cloud of ash that swallowed the city whole. Survivors ran as though the earth itself was crumbling behind them. At 10:28 a.m., the North Tower followed. The skyline of New York changed forever in less than 30 minutes. The strongest nation in the world had been brought to its knees. And as the dust settled, one question cut through the grief, the terror, and the silence. Who did this? And why? New York City, the beating heart of America, had transformed into something unrecognizable. The streets were coated in gray. Not just dust, but human ash, steel, concrete, paper, and memories. Survivors stumbled like ghosts, covered head to toe in white powder. The only sound louder than the wailing sirens was silence, the silence of shock. People walked miles across bridges with their shoes in their hands, their eyes fixed on the smoke rising from where the towers once stood. Some clutched photographs to their chests, faces of husbands, wives, children, taped to cardboard with frantic messages, "Missing. Have you seen them? Please call." Every poster was a desperate question. Every unanswered phone call was a scream into the void. Inside hospitals, emergency rooms prepared for a flood of survivors. But the stretchers stayed empty. Doctors and nurses waited, but very few came. Because there were no survivors to treat. On voicemail machines across the city, messages were left in trembling voices. "I'm on the 105th floor. "There's too much smoke. Tell the kids I love them." Another, "If I don't make it out, I need you to know I love you." For many families, those final phone calls became the only goodbye. And still, the tower's fall wasn't the end. Fires burned underground for weeks. Piles of steel, twisted like paperclips, smoldered as rescue workers clawed through the wreckage with their bare hands. Firefighters dug for their brothers. Police officers searched for friends. Volunteers worked until their lungs burned from breathing toxic smoke. The city had become a graveyard. And yet, in the middle of despair, another feeling began to rise: rage. Because even as the smoke still poured from the ruins, one question consumed every American heart: who did this? Was it a foreign government? A shadowy network? Or someone already hiding inside America's walls? At candlelight vigils, people held each other and wept. But in the White House Situation Room, leaders gathered around a different fire: the burning need for answers. They were not looking at this as a natural disaster. This was not an accident. This was mass murder. The largest homicide in American history. And the killers were still out there. Ground Zero was more than rubble. It was the largest crime scene in American history. Steel beams stood jagged like broken teeth against the sky. Smoke still curled upward, carrying with it the smell of burning fuel, ash, and death. Rescue workers moved carefully, but among them, another team arrived: FBI agents, NYPD detectives, and federal investigators. They weren't just searching for survivors. They were hunting for evidence. Every fragment of paper, every scrap of metal, every twisted piece of steel was collected, catalogued, and preserved. But what they found was chilling. Within days, investigators uncovered a passport. Not from a victim, but from a hijacker. Among the ruins were fragments of flight manifests, IDs, and notes written in Arabic. These weren't coincidences. They were breadcrumbs. And they pointed to something terrifying: a network. This wasn't the work of one man, or even a small group. This was an operation. Carefully planned. Ruthlessly executed. Intelligence analysts pored over passenger lists and flight records. Slowly, a picture began to emerge: 19 men, working in 4 coordinated teams. They had blended into American society for months. Some took flying lessons. Others lived quietly in suburban neighborhoods. They boarded planes with nothing more than box cutters. And in less than 2 hours, they brought a superpower to its knees. The investigation revealed names tied to something darker: Al-Qaeda. A shadowy terrorist organization with cells around the world. And then came the most horrifying discovery. These men had not just planned to kill thousands. They had originally dreamed of killing tens of thousands. Targets weren't just the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. There were whispers of nuclear plants, the White House, even the Capitol building. America realized how close it had come to losing far more. The crime scene extended beyond Manhattan. Pieces of Flight 93 lay scattered in a Pennsylvania field, where passengers had fought back with their bare hands, preventing a fourth strike. At the Pentagon, investigators picked through fire-charred walls for clues, tracing the trail of destruction back to those who orchestrated it. Every piece of evidence pointed in the same direction: Al-Qaeda. And at the center of it all, one name surfaced over and over. A man the FBI already knew. A man who had haunted America's watch lists for years. Osama bin Laden. For investigators, it was like staring into the face of a ghost. He had been behind attacks before: the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, the 1998 U.S. Embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania, and the deadly strike on the USS Cole in 2000. But this was his masterpiece of terror. The United States had just uncovered the identity of its most wanted man. But finding him would prove nearly impossible. Because this ghost had an army, and he was hiding in the shadows. The trail from Ground Zero led to a name the world would soon never forget: Osama bin Laden. But to investigators, bin Laden wasn't just a man. He was a ghost. A shadow. A figure who had been circling America's radar for nearly a decade, striking, then disappearing into the mountains, as if swallowed by the earth. Born into extraordinary wealth in Saudi Arabia, bin Laden could have lived a life of luxury. Mansions, cars, influence. But instead, he turned his back on it all. He chose war. A holy war, in his eyes. In the 1980s, he traveled to Afghanistan during the Soviet invasion. There, in the rugged mountains, he built something that would outlive empires, a network of loyal fighters. They called themselves Al-Qaeda. The base. At first, the world barely noticed. But bin Laden's ambitions grew darker and deadlier. In 1993, the World Trade Center was bombed for the first time. A truck filled with explosives detonated beneath one of the towers, killing 6 people and injuring over 1,000. It was meant to topple the towers entirely. It didn't succeed, but it was only the beginning. Then, 1998, twin U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania erupted in fire and blood, killing more than 200, wounding thousands. In 2000, Al-Qaeda struck again, this time against the USS Cole, a U.S. Navy destroyer docked in Yemen. 17 sailors died. Each attack carried bin Laden's fingerprints. Each time, he mocked America from afar, slipping away before justice could touch him. But September 11, 2001, that was different. That was his masterpiece of death. His message to the world. His declaration of war. And it worked. America was in shock. Millions were grieving. Fear rippled across the globe. Suddenly, this man, this ghost in the caves of Afghanistan, had become the single most dangerous figure on the planet. But who exactly was he? To his followers, bin Laden was a savior, a holy warrior standing against Western power. To his enemies, he was a murderer, a fanatic who had turned faith into a weapon. He built an army of men willing to die for him, training them in remote camps, teaching them to see martyrdom as victory. And here's the chilling truth, September 11th wasn't even his endgame. Intelligence later revealed bin Laden dreamed of nuclear weapons. Biological weapons. Attacks that could cripple entire nations in hours. The FBI placed his face on their most wanted list. His bounty soared to $25 million. But for years, he remained untouchable. Because the ghost had more than just soldiers. He had protectors. The Taliban, ruling Afghanistan, gave him safe haven. His network stretched across the Middle East, Africa, and Europe. Money funneled in through charities and hidden accounts. Couriers carried messages by hand so no call could be intercepted. Bin Laden had built a fortress of shadows, an empire invisible to satellites, unreachable by armies. For every lead investigators found, he was already gone. For every whisper of his location, there were 3 false trails. Still, one thing became clear, bin Laden was not finished. If left free, he would strike again. Harder. Deadlier. And so the United States made a vow, the ghost would be hunted. No matter how long it took. But finding a man who lived in caves, who trusted no technology, who hid behind an army of zealots. That would prove harder than anything America had ever faced. And as the hunt began, so too did a war. The smoke from Ground Zero had barely cleared when the hunt for Osama bin Laden began. The United States wanted answers. But more than that, it wanted justice. On September 17th, just 6 days after the towers fell, President George W. Bush looked straight into the cameras and said, "We will not tire, we will not falter, and we will not fail." Bin Laden had a new title now, the world's most wanted man. But where was he? The CIA's first move was to follow the money. Investigators traced bank accounts, shell companies, and secret donations. Billions of dollars flowed through the web of Al-Qaeda. But every trail led to dead ends, false names, and burned records. So they turned to people. Captured operatives. Spies. Informants. From Pakistan to Saudi Arabia, whispers emerged. Bin Laden was hiding in Afghanistan, shielded by the Taliban. He was said to live in caves so deep even satellites couldn't see him. Others claimed he moved constantly, slipping across borders like smoke through cracks. And then came a new name, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. A mastermind. The so-called architect of 9/11. It was he, not bin Laden, who designed the blueprint of the attacks, who picked the hijackers, trained them, and choreographed the worst day in modern American history. If bin Laden was the ghost, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was the engineer of the nightmare. Capturing him became as urgent as finding bin Laden himself. But every time the CIA moved in, they found only abandoned safe houses, hard drives smashed to pieces, and notes burned to ash. It was like chasing shadows. Meanwhile, the FBI placed bin Laden at the top of their most wanted terrorists list. His face appeared on posters, in airports, in the news. A $25 million reward was offered. And yet, he was nowhere. The Taliban refused to give him up. Protected by their fighters, he moved through the mountains with ease, never staying in one place for long. His followers carried his words through audio tapes and handwritten letters, spreading his message of war without ever exposing his location. For the CIA, frustration turned into obsession. They set up secret black sites. Interrogated suspects with brutal methods. Some broke. Some lied. Some told partial truths that sent agents running in circles. And then there was the terrain itself. Afghanistan's mountains weren't just vast, they were impossible. Winding caves, ancient tunnels, valleys where entire armies had disappeared before. To find one man in this wilderness was like finding a single grain of sand in a desert storm. Still, the hunt pressed forward. The U.S. military launched Operation Enduring Freedom. Troops stormed Al-Qaeda strongholds, captured weapons caches, and dismantled training camps. Dozens of operatives were killed. But bin Laden? He slipped away every time. Sometimes by minutes. It became clear, bin Laden wasn't just hiding. He was playing the world's deadliest game of chess. Every move by the United States, he countered. Every strategy, he anticipated. He stayed one step ahead, as if he could see into the minds of his hunters. But ghosts can't hide forever. And so the U.S. shifted tactics. If they couldn't see him, maybe they could find the people around him. Couriers. Bodyguards. Men who carried his secrets. They began listening for whispers of unusual names, strange travel patterns, money quietly shifting hands. Years passed. Leads rose and fell. Some thought the ghost might already be dead. Others feared he was planning something even worse than 9/11. But one thing was certain, America would not stop. The manhunt for bin Laden wasn't just an investigation. It wasn't even just a war. It was personal, for the families who lost loved ones, for the firefighters who ran into towers, for the nation still reeling. September 11th didn't just change New York. It didn't just change America. It changed the entire world. Airports, once a place of family goodbyes and easy travel, became fortresses. Metal detectors. Armed guards. Luggage searched and scanned. Shoes off. Belts off. Every flight a potential target. Fear traveled with every boarding pass. Parents looked at the skies differently. Children grew up in a world where words like terror alert and homeland security were part of daily life. Red, yellow, orange. Danger wasn't distant anymore, it was everywhere. And fear wasn't limited to the air. Letters laced with anthrax began arriving in U.S. mailboxes. Senators, journalists, office workers. People were poisoned in their homes, their workplaces, their daily routines. The message was clear, you are not safe anywhere. The ripple spread across the globe. London, Madrid, Bali. Cities were bombed in Al-Qaeda-inspired attacks. Every headline carried echoes of New York. Every explosion whispered the same truth. The war that started on September 11th wasn't over. It had just begun. For many, bin Laden became less of a man and more of a monster. His face haunted news broadcasts, his name invoked fear like a curse. And the question was always the same, where is he? The war in Afghanistan raged on. American soldiers hunted through mountains and villages, toppling the Taliban government, only for fighters to melt away and regroup. Iraq became the next battlefield. The world was split, allies standing with America, others questioning the cost. But in homes across the United States, grief was still fresh. Families sat at empty dinner tables. Children grew up without parents. Survivors of the towers carried burns, broken bones, and nightmares they could never shake. And the cruelest wound of all? The mastermind of their suffering was still free. Every year on the anniversary, names were read at Ground Zero. Nearly 3,000 names. And with each name came a silent promise, we will not forget. We will not forgive. But how long could a ghost hide? Intelligence agencies shared whispers. Bin Laden was seen in Pakistan. No, in the mountains of Tora Bora. No, in some secret desert base. Every rumor sent agents racing. Every lead ended in dust. To many Americans, it felt like justice might never come. The fear was no longer just about another attack. It was about the possibility that the man who had shattered the world might live out his days untouched, laughing from the shadows. And yet, beneath the despair, there was determination. The hunt was still on. Analysts studied every intercepted call, every suspicious money transfer. Special forces trained for missions no one could even describe out loud. Bin Laden might have had time. But time is a double-edged sword. Because every year, every month, every day, his enemies grew sharper. The world lived in fear. But that fear wasn't paralyzing anymore. It was fueling something else. Resolve. The ghost had cast his shadow long enough. And in the silence, the world was waiting. Waiting for justice. For nearly a decade, Osama bin Laden became less a man and more a phantom. The world's most wanted criminal, and yet, he might as well have vanished into thin air. But ghosts always leave shadows. By 2007, CIA analysts were working around the clock. Most leads went nowhere. But then, one sliver of hope appeared, not from satellites, not from spies, but from something far more ordinary. A courier. For years, U.S. intelligence had suspected that bin Laden avoided phones, emails, even electricity. He relied on trusted men, couriers who carried his words by hand. If they could find the courier, they might find the ghost. It was painstaking work. A name overheard in an interrogation. A rumor whispered in a Pakistani village. A license plate caught on a surveillance camera. Piece by piece, analysts began building a profile. And then, they found him. One courier stood out. He never used phones. He burned his trash. He drove to isolated areas, never taking the same road twice. His behavior screamed secrecy. The CIA followed quietly, watching every move. And what they discovered was chilling. He led them to a strange compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. Unlike any other house in the neighborhood, this one was fortress-like. High walls topped with barbed wire. Windows covered. No internet. No phone lines. The residents never put trash out for collection. They burned it inside. And then came the most haunting detail of all. Inside the compound, a tall man was seen walking the courtyard, always careful, always shielded. The analysts gave him a nickname, the Pacer. Could this be bin Laden? Some believed it was undeniable. The size. The secrecy. The behavior. Others weren't convinced. What if it was just another warlord? Another dead end? After 10 years of failure, no one wanted to bet everything on a hunch. But the families of 9/11 were still waiting. America was still waiting. In a windowless room deep in Langley, Virginia, the CIA briefed President Barack Obama. The evidence was circumstantial. There were no photos. No intercepted calls. Just shadows on satellite images. And yet, the silence was deafening. If not here, then where? If not now, then when? For weeks, debates raged behind closed doors. Was this worth the risk? A failed mission could destroy alliances. A wrong target could kill innocents. The world was watching, even if it didn't know it yet. Finally, Obama made the call. The risk was enormous. But the potential reward? Justice. Closure. The end of the ghost. SEAL Team 6 began training in secret. They built a replica of the compound, rehearsing every step. Helicopters flew at night, blades slicing silently through the darkness. Every man knew the danger. Some might not return. But every man knew the stakes. Nearly 10 years had passed since the towers fell. The world was still scarred. Families were still grieving. The mastermind was still free. And now, for the first time, they had a chance. The ghost had been cornered. But could they finish the hunt? May 2, 2011. Abbottabad, Pakistan. The night was silent. Too silent. Then, out of the darkness, came a sound almost no one in the sleeping city could identify, the low thunder of Black Hawk helicopters slicing through the sky. Aboard those helicopters were the most elite warriors America had, SEAL Team 6. Men trained for missions that never made the news. Men who had rehearsed every step of this night until it was muscle memory. They knew the risks. They were flying into sovereign Pakistan, without permission. If they were caught, it could trigger an international crisis. If the intel was wrong, they'd be raiding the wrong house. And if it was right, they would be facing the most dangerous man in the world. And yet, not one of them hesitated. As the compound came into view, disaster struck. One of the Black Hawks clipped the compound wall. Its tail rotor shattered, the helicopter crashed into the courtyard in a burst of dust and sparks. For most missions, that would have been the end. But these men weren't trained to panic. In seconds, they regrouped, secured the perimeter, and moved forward. Explosives tore through doors. Boots pounded on concrete floors. The sound of controlled chaos echoed through the compound. Women screamed. Children cried. And gunfire erupted. Room by room, the SEALs moved with lethal precision. They weren't there to fight a war, they were there for one man. On the third floor, at the end of a narrow hallway, they found him. A tall figure. Bearded. Wrapped in the folds of night. Osama bin Laden. For a decade, his name had been whispered with fear, cursed with hatred, mourned with grief. He was the architect of nearly 3,000 deaths on September 11th. The man who turned the world upside down. And now, he was just a man standing in a dark room. A single shot. Then another. And the ghost was gone. The SEALs confirmed his identity, snapped photographs, and within minutes were on their way out, carrying with them the body of the most wanted man on Earth. Back in Washington, President Obama and his cabinet watched the mission unfold in real time from the Situation Room. Every second felt like an hour. When the words finally came through, Geronimo. EKIA. Enemy killed in action, the room exhaled. A weight the nation had carried for 10 years began to lift. Within 24 hours, bin Laden's body was buried at sea. There would be no shrine, no grave to inspire followers. Only the knowledge that justice, at long last, had been served. Across America, people poured into the streets. Crowds gathered at Ground Zero, at the White House, in cities from coast to coast. They sang, they wept, they cheered. For many, it wasn't about celebration. It was about closure. About knowing that the man who had haunted their lives for a decade could haunt them no more. But the silence didn't end. Even in death, bin Laden left questions. Some demanded proof. Others doubted the official story. Photos of his body were never released. Conspiracies spread like wildfire. Still, for the families who had waited almost 10 years, one truth was undeniable: the man responsible for their deepest pain was gone. The hunt was over. But the scars? The scars would last forever. The Twin Towers are gone. The rubble has been cleared. And Osama bin Laden is dead. But the scars? The scars remain. For the children who never saw their parents come home that day. For the parents who buried sons and daughters too soon. For the firefighters who ran into flames and never came back. Even today, the pain echoes. September 11th wasn't just an attack on buildings. It was an attack on people, on families, on lives that were ordinary until the world changed in a single morning. Nearly 3,000 lives stolen in less than 2 hours. Husbands who never kissed their wives goodbye. Mothers who never picked up their children from school. Friends who left voicemails that would become the last words their loved ones would ever hear. And those who survived carry invisible wounds. PTSD. Guilt. Memories of stairwells filled with smoke and strangers holding hands as the walls shook. New York itself became a different city. For weeks after the attacks, the air was thick with ash. Posters lined the streets, faces of the missing staring back at anyone who walked by. Every corner carried whispers of grief, every street a reminder of what had been lost. And yet, out of that pain came something remarkable. Stories of strangers who carried the wounded down endless flights of stairs. Firefighters who climbed toward fire when everyone else ran away. Office workers who linked arms and promised to escape together, and kept that promise. September 11th was an act of evil. But it also revealed something stronger than evil: humanity. 10 years later, when justice finally came for bin Laden, it was not triumph that defined the moment, but relief. Families stood at Ground Zero and whispered the names of loved ones into the night sky. Some cried. Some smiled faintly. Some said nothing at all. Because how do you measure justice against the loss of a life? How do you balance a bullet with the absence of a father, a mother, a child? For many, bin Laden's death felt like an ending. But the truth is, 9/11 never truly ended. Every year, the names are read aloud at memorials. Bells toll. Silence falls. Children who were toddlers that day now stand as adults, carrying the memory of parents they barely knew. And in that silence, a truth lingers. 9/11 was not about towers, or planes, or politics. It was about people. Ordinary people caught in the crosshairs of hatred. The scars remain in the skyline of New York, in the empty chairs at dinner tables, in the echoes of voices left behind on voicemail tapes. But so does resilience. The story of 9/11 is not only about loss, it is about strength. A nation brought to its knees, but one that stood back up. Families shattered, but refusing to forget. A generation scarred, but determined to honor the memory of the fallen by living. Bin Laden's death closed one chapter. But the story continues in the lives of every person who carries the memory of that day. Because 9/11 was not just history. It was humanity at its most broken, and humanity at its most unbreakable. And that is why, decades later, the scars remain. 14 years later, the pain remains. For some, it feels like yesterday. For others, it has changed every tomorrow. This was more than an attack, it was a wound carved into humanity itself, one that still bleeds in silence. Our hearts bleed perpetually. This crime didn't just change lives in New York or Washington, it changed the world. And even now, every second we live, its shadow still follows us.